Do good work is not a label, but a way of living. It is the constant and diligent effort to achieve a new level of excellence in one's own life. It is the hidden inner beauty behind the struggle to achieve excellence. It's not perfect, but imperfect. It is the effort, discipline, and focus that often goes unnoticed. The goal of Do Good Work is to highlight that drive. The guests I have on this show emulate this drive in their own special way. You'll be able to apply new ideas into your own life by learning from them. We will also have one-on-one episodes with me where we'll dive into my own experience with entrepreneurship and leadership. Every episode is designed to provide you with ideas that you can apply and grow in excellence in all areas of your life, business, and career.
Today on the Do Good Work podcast, we have Paul Crick. Paul is the founder and managing partner of his own leadership development consultancy, the Elevate Partnership. He's an EMCC accredited coach, senior practitioner, and has just taken up a voluntary role as a professional development director for European Mentoring and Coaching Council in the UK. Paul has been management consultant, coach, educator, facilitator, and trainer for over 20 years, working across the world with private, public, and voluntary organizations for PriceWaterhouseCoopers, CapGemini, and IBM. Paul previously co-led IBM's global coaching community of practice of 4,000 coaches across 80 countries and served as an executive coach in IBM's professional coaching service. He has taught and coached leaders individually and in groups, both inside and outside of IBM, across 22 countries and up to including C-level executives. Paul currently lives, and these are his words, not mine. He currently lives happily in the middle of nowhere in the UK, nestled in nature with his wife Tina, their dogs Jock and Maisie, and horse Penny, while he indulges in his passion for Aikido and writing music. Paul, thank you so much for being on today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Paul, I think, one of the interesting points that we had a pre-call, obviously, in discussion around that and learning more about what you do and how you serve clients. The one thing that I really appreciated with your approach and the way that you view things is how our brain actually works versus how we'd like our brain to actually work. For example, the very fact that our brain is wired and functioned to keep us alive and not necessarily to make us, quote unquote, happy. So can we talk a little bit more about, your experience with the brain and how that works with leadership, with culture, with teams?
Well, I think it's an important distinction that usually, well, in my experience, doesn't get covered in leader development or leadership development training courses, and consequently, there's this mad scramble when we feel uncomfortable because of pressure or stress or things that aren't happening well, or a meeting or a conversation that's been not as good as it might be, or even downright unpleasant. Then not understanding that principle straight out of the gate causes all sorts of difficulties. Because the reality is the uncomfortable feelings we feel mean our brain is working exactly as it should. And it's doing its job, because its job is to figure out, am I under threat? And, it's there's research to show that the tone of a voice can influence how our nervous system responds. And I think, when we talk about the brain, I want to go further than that, because most people think of the brain as what's inside the skull, which obviously as an organ it is. But the brain, there's the brain, the organ, and then there's brain as mind, which is slightly different. And it's, most of the problems we have are because of the world doesn't quite work according to how we think it should do. So we tend to get upset when it's like, well, why isn't this happening this way? I expect this. Why is this person treating me this way? Don't you know who I am? Or little things like that cause us to think that. And we are making unconscious assessments of our environment all the time. It's almost like we've got a ship's radar that sweep, that circular sweep that says, is my environment safe? Is the person facing me or the people I'm with safe to be with? And its influence. What's fascinating is when you disappear into the detail of our neuroanatomy and our interpersonal neurobiology, you discover that there's all kinds of little mechanisms that try to decipher from the 11 million bits of information we receive every second. In that information, I mean, there's just no way you can filter that consciously. You can't go through every piece of information and go, okay, I'm safe now. That just doesn't happen. What happens is we filter about 50 to 60 bits per second, which is what we're aware of. So if I said to you, can you feel the underside of your little toe now on your left foot? You weren't thinking about that, but the minute I said it, your attention went there and you felt it. Yeah,
it's true.
But the feeling in your left foot is always there. It's just under your consciousness. It's just there. It's just you chose to pay attention to it. And how we pay attention becomes really key, because the attention mechanism determines the meaning we make, or as Brené Brown would say, the story we choose to tell ourselves in this particular moment.
I want to pause there, because you mentioned a few things that I definitely want to help unpack here. So first of all, feeling uncomfortable, going through those moments, so those emotions, that's normal. So that means our brain is working as it should. And I heard a quote recently from psychologist Susan David around, if you just want to go through life and not feel any sort of uncomfortable feelings and not be daunted by goals or not be afraid and stuff like that, then you want dead people's goals. Because this is just I thought that quote was pretty dramatic, but it's true. And when you mentioned earlier, when you process, so you're identifying, the feeling, and then being able to interpret it in a different way. And I think the interpretation piece is something that is either not done, either because it takes work to do. It's not that much work, but it does take work. But I think it's also lack of understanding what to do when those feelings arise, and performing positive actions to counter them.
Well, I think there's a step before that, which is understanding how feelings work. And feelings are a sort of bottom-up process as well as a top-down process that happens in parallel. And really, our brain is trying to make the best possible guess moment to moment as to what on earth is happening. So what it does, so the body, the fascia and the muscles is the most innervated part of our body, in terms of number of nerves and number of nerve connections. And we have, from this, we have a process called interoception. And interoception is the internal sense of that we have of our body from the inside. So, things like having a sinking feeling in the pit of our stomach, feeling sweaty, those are kinds of reactions. But how we feel on the inside, we send a message to the brain. So the more messages go from the body to the brain than the brain to the body. And we send a message to the brain that goes, "Hey, I've got this feeling, and there is no label for this feeling. This is a feeling I haven't had before. Then I don't know what to label it." Implicit memory. Is there anything in my memory that says, have I been in a similar context? And if so, have I felt the same thing? And if so, what did I call that? Am I calm? Am I miserable? Am I anxious? Am I overwrought? And often this emotional literacy, this ability to label an emotion, gives us that reassurance. It's kind of like, oh yeah, I felt this before. I'm scared. I stood looking out of the window of a 50 floor building, and I looked down at the ground, and I felt this kind of weird dizziness in my stomach, almost like weightlessness, and it was really not nice. And I remember when I did that in New York, and I remember when I did that in Dubai, and I remember when I did that in Melbourne. So I know what that is, and it's okay, and that's great. And half the battle is trying to figure that out, which is the brain doing its thing and trying to make an educated guess. Now, alongside that, we've got the process of exteroception, and exteroception is what we would traditionally regard as the five senses. What are we seeing? What are we hearing? What do we touch? What do we smell? What do we taste? And there are mechanisms in each of those parts of our anatomy that determine our ability to say, what's going on here? Am I safe?
Mm.
So in the muscle, for example, there's in the ear, there's a muscle that's really, really small, that is set to detect a frequency. And if the frequency detected increases above a certain level, it actually triggers a message into the brain to say, this sounds like it might be unsafe.
Huh.
Which is why, if you think about it, when parents speak to their baby children to calm them and reassure them,
Mm-hmm.
they speak in prosody. It's quite a lyrical, lower frequency voice than perhaps we would normally speak in conversation. So it might be, there, honey, it's okay. Things will be all right. You're doing fine. Everything's safe. You're here. I'm here for you. That tone of voice is heard by your ear, and your ear goes, oh, right, okay, it's okay. Kick the parasympathetic nervous system into play, because it's part of the message that says it's okay and safe. Now, that all these things happen in parallel, and they happen in our unconscious. So sometimes we can feel unsafe and go, oh, I feel unsafe, but too many things have happened at once, and I can't figure out what it is
what
to label this. And in the animal world, you'll see this. So you'll see a horse spook. It will just freeze. All its muscles will seize. It's heard a paper bag in a bush. It's heard a voice 3 county away, and it just goes, oh, I don't know what that is. So I will dissociate. I will switch on all my defensive systems that says I am now ready to either run the hell out of here or to fight.
How have you calmed your horse when Penny's done that?
I can't. I can't. And this is the other thing. Obviously it doesn't transfer from humans to horses particularly well. But you can stroke them. You can so horses are energetic animals. So how you move. You see riders on top, and all these riders that will buy equipment trying to make their horse do what they want it to. And really the issue is the rider, because they're not communicating through their energy to let the horse know that you feel safe on top of them, and you're communicating that to them. And then you're working with the rhythm of the horse as it steps forward and moves, and the barrel of its stomach shifts from left to right. So you'll see bareback riders, in complete harmony with their horse.
Interesting.
Because they move with the rhythm. And it becomes really interesting when you think about, if you look at the work of HeartMath Institute, then we have an electromagnetic field that extends 6 to 7 feet beyond our body. So have you ever been in a situation where, you've gone into a room and you've brushed past someone, you may not have touched them, but you go, that's weird. There's something about your energy that doesn't quite feel right. You okay? You ever done that?
Yeah. No, I mean, you get a sense feeling, but you have to be attuned to that, or an awareness to that.
Yeah. And that's what's happening. So horses are highly sensitive to this. We're the only species that can communicate through speech for the most part that we recognize, and our ability to think and reason is supposedly sets us apart from a species in terms of doing that. But we still struggle with being able to communicate
our own feelings, our own emotions, interpretations.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, going back to, I mean, you mentioned a lot of things with the interoception, extraception, but I think that it begins first of all with the awareness that you're experiencing a certain emotion, and the fact that you mentioned of labeling it and being able to work through that. I remember I was reading a book about brain development, as well as with child psychology, where a child or a toddler may be feeling an emotion, but they don't have that experience or that implicit memory to know, I know what this feeling is before. So helping them define it actually calms them down, because now they have their grasp around what they're feeling and labeling it. But the first step is always the awareness before you can ever label. How would you suggest to be more attuned to understand, hey, this is This is a feeling, it's an emotion. This is something that I should take action on, or something that I should work on labeling in order to take, which I believe would be like the third step, an empowering action based on.
So in terms of finding the right label, I mean, if you search emotions on the internet, you will find both various applications. There's a really cool one that uses the metaphor of the galaxy to sort of produce clusters of emotions around. So, you could say anger is the planet, and then the planets around it in its orbit are variations of anger, or sadness is another planet, and there are variations of that, to become more literate as to there's the joke that goes, men only experience 4 emotions, which is happy, sad, horny, and pissed off, or hungry. And hungry is a different feeling. But so just becoming familiar with those and exploring those through processes like working with a coach, working with journaling, to write down. I remember I was going through a particularly tough time, sitting in a railway station here in the UK, and I just had a notebook out, and I was pulling my hair out, and I just thought, I just need to get down my thoughts and feelings, and it doesn't matter, just keep the pen moving, and whatever comes out comes out. And when I read it back 2 days later, it was kind of gibberish, but I know that just expressing that, giving a route and an avenue to explore that was really helpful. I also know from my coaching and therapy work that a lot of psychoeducation really alleviates a lot of the problem. Being able to talk about this discomfort and the ability to share that with, they say a problem shared is a problem halved, and it's very, very true. The expression, I feel this, I can't articulate it, but it's kind of, let me express it in words I can use and I do know, to see if I can give you a sense of, how I'm feeling.
When it comes to those habits, those, obviously the journaling or working with coaches or peers to be able to understand what the next actions are, how does that parallel with the work that you do with teams and leadership? What have you seen the applicable strategies or tactics that has helped individuals or teams, build resilience and, continue to thrive?
So one of the things I use is a digital avatar-based system called ProReel, and ProReel allows people to join a virtual storytelling world. It's almost like you're in a computer game, and people make avatars of themselves, which then allow them to build a story either on their own or collectively within a group. And the ability to assign to an avatar, feelings, postures, emoticons that express the feelings, inner voices, so the ability to label an inner voice that says, to all intents and purposes, I feel okay, but I've got this inner voice that says, I have a pressing deadline, and I'm worried about that, or I have an inner voice that says imposter. Here's my inner imposter voice, and here's what it's saying. And they say, a picture paints 1,000 words. If you try to describe that in a sort of a talking setting around a flip chart, it would take a lot longer to achieve what you can achieve in a digital world using a picture to tell us to actually co-create and create a story. So you can do this one-to-one. So I give you an example. I was working with a colleague, a female colleague, and she came to a session, and she said, can we use this session to do something personal? And I said, well, as long as you feel it's appropriate and you're comfortable sharing it, everything's confidential. So yeah, it's not too difficult. A topic. She said, my daughter's leaving for college, and I said, oh, okay. And she said, I just want to work through my feelings on that because we're not communicating really well, and it's bothering me because she's leaving the family nest, and I want it to be a positive experience for both of us. And to know that we can both stay in touch and still have a mother-daughter relationship, albeit on she's now moved out of the house and she's developing her own independence in college life. And I said, sure. So we went into this world and we created an avatar, and this world has a castle within it,
Huh.
And basically you come down from the castle and there's a path, and the path comes to a gateway and the gate's open. I said, okay, let's see who needs to be in the scene. So she said, well, I do. I said, okay, put an avatar in the scene. I said, put it where you think it needs to be. And she put it in front of the gateway. I said, great, give it a color. How are you feeling? What's the emoticon? What's the posture for this? And she was encouraging and she was happy. She was for her daughter, and her inner voice was saying, I'm losing my child. And another inner voice was saying, but I don't want to get in the way of, my child growing up and going out into the world. Anyway, we'd done all that. And I said, so who else needs to be in the scene? And she said, well, my daughter, obviously. I said, okay, where's she? She said, well, she's at the bottom of the path from the castle, because castle's kind of home. And she's looking out beyond me into the wider world. I said, great. How's she feeling? So we did all the voices and the inner voices and the posture and the emoticon, and it was all good. I said, so just pause for a second. What do you see in this scene? And she said, well, she didn't say anything for about a minute. She took a moment to pause, and then she said, oh my God. I said, what have you seen? And she said, the problem's me. I'm in the way. I'm standing in the middle of the gate that my daughter needs to go through in order to go into the outer world. I said, so what needs to change? She said, I need to stand aside. I need to leave the gate open for my daughter to go. I went, there you go. And that was it. So, working through all those feelings in a storytelling setting, in a digital environment, allowed this woman to reconcile her role in inhibiting her daughter unconsciously and creating a unnecessary tension between them, to then move that out of the way to create a constructive environment that was much more empowering, that created much more options for how the process of leaving home for a daughter actually happened.
It's like a tool to visually see or have imagery around the feelings and perspectives and others' perspective. That's very powerful. I think another, I really want to hone in on a little bit more for our listeners right now. What are some of the habits that we can start doing today, or even after listening to this, that we can start being able to become more aware? And I just for our listeners out there, the premise, there are studies that show that emotion, when we measure emotion in our brain, we actually can't distinguish the difference between emotion and rational thought. Like it's using significant chunks of the brain that we can't find a delineation yet, right? It's 2020, right? Where emotion and rationale.
Well, they don't exist in one place in the brain. They are a network.
It's a network. It's all working together.
Yeah, and if you go read Lisa Feldman Barrett's stuff and Dr. Ian McGilchrist's research, it talks exclusively to, the triune brain doesn't exist. Emotions don't reside in specific parts of the brain. There's a lot of myths that are still taught in business schools about, this is how the brain is and this is how it works. So. So one of the developments that's really worth tuning into is the idea of polyvagal theory. So we have this nerve called the vagus nerve that touches all the major organs that essentially are triggered to either help us fight or shut down and freeze, or to relax. And really it's exercises that strengthen what's called vagal tone, which is really controlling how that vagus nerve responds. So rather than being purely reactive, the ability to stand in a moment of pressure and say, okay, what I need to do is I need to do a belly breath, because the belly breath, and you'll hear the Navy SEALs talk about box breathing. So equal breaths. So in for a count of 3, hold it for 3, release for 3, and hold for 3. Anything that involves connecting the mind and the body together. So one of the reasons I do Aikido is that's my vagal tone training, because when someone's coming at you with a sword, so my chief instructor is the 7th Dan. He's a former member of the Special Forces. He taught armed combat. He flew tornadoes in active combat. He's an incredible man, and he knows what he's doing when he's wielding a sword at you. And on the mat, it's scary because, you come with a martial spirit, you train with a martial spirit. And the idea is, the more you put yourself in the environment, the more you train your ability to respond under pressure. And we can do that in different ways. So how do you activate and tone your parasympathetic nervous system in stressful situations? So taking a cold shower for 10 seconds, having a hot shower in the morning, and then for the last 10 seconds, just standing under the cold shower and not moving, because the instant reaction is to jump out of the shower because it's like, ow, it's cold. But can you stay there? Because the longer you can stay there, that's conditioning your fight-flight response. So it's a whole series of practices. So yoga, all the mind-body exercises, any martial art, tai chi, yoga, breathing, going for runs where it's mindful running, swimming. Swimming can be meditative in its practice. Anything can be meditative that does that essentially changes the internal biochemistry.
Yeah.
Focus on your body, because we are slaves to the idea that the mind is supreme. That thinking, we prize thinking and thought and rational thought above everything else, but that runs counter to how we actually operate as human beings.
Yeah, we're attached to our bodies too. And that's interesting that you bring that up. So the practice is, again, more of a holistic approach. So I guess, some tactical or strategic things that you can do is take cold showers. That's one of them. In addition to being able to process and identify and learn more about what emotions you experience, and maybe do more research in regards to what those definitions for emotions are, and then how can you work through them, either through visual storytelling, reviewing your emotions in a visual environment or imagination, and then being able to see different perspectives to work through things that are naturally make you feel uncomfortable, and understanding why it's making you feel uncomfortable. And I think the last step, and this is always something that our mind either will always know, will have reference or have support from a peer group, mentor, or coach in regards to what's the empowering next step. What are we able to do there?
And the thing to realize, and it's where emotional intelligence training goes slightly awry, is that there is no such thing as one single brain. We always co-regulate in groups, because we're always making the assessment of the other person. Am I safe? And therefore, you get that combining of two brains, because one brain has to send out the signal it's safe. The other one's trying to figure out if it's safe. Do you see what I'm saying? So you have to co-regulate.
With two people you're mentioning, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
When you're talking about two people or a group, you have to co-regulate first before you self-regulate. Whereas sort of raw emotional intelligence theory will say, well, we co-regulate and we self-regulate. There is a dependence. You need to feel safe before you will self-regulate. And you've only to look at human development. You've only got to look at young babies separate. There's a series of experiments that are, when I was training, was part of the human development module. And you watch these babies who are separated from their birth mother, and a substitute female figure is placed in the room so that the baby has another person to relate to. They are looking unconsciously for the cues from their natural birth mother, and it's just not there. And the baby gets distressed very, very quickly. It's quite a distressing video. I mean, it's safe. There's nothing unethical.
Yeah.
It's quite a distressing video to watch. And you go, that process doesn't really change fundamentally through our life. The only thing that moderates it is our experience and our implicit memory that is stored because of that experience, that says, oh yeah, I've had this before, it's okay. So co-regulate before you self-regulate, which is the bit of psychological safety that gets missed.
Exactly. For leaderships too, even if it's in remote teams too, like making sure that all of your team members feel that sense of safety before we can actually make progress. And that's very, very powerful. Well, Paul, for all of our listeners out there, what's the best place for people to go to thank you for this episode and also reach out to you personally?
Well, thank you for having me. You'll find me on LinkedIn, so please do connect there. I'm also on Twitter as Paul H. Crick, C-R-I-C-K. and you can see my website at theelevatepartnership.com.
Wonderful. And put all those links in the show notes, Paul. Thank you again.
Thank you.